Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. I have always been saying that the democracy has changed the meaning, but people with vision can always make the system democratic in essence. And it's a great news for the people when any democratically elected leader takes steps to ensure that one of the representatives or any one of the representatives duly elected during elections can be kicked out by the citizens themselves, by the voters themselves. It is also important when the people can initiate action that they feel is required, but the elected leaders don't want to take that action. Whether it is a sin of omission or a sin of commission, it's a fact that the elected representatives more often than not forget once the election is over and feel that they are entitled to all the perks, all the benefits, because they feel that at the time of next election, they'll be able to beguile the people still more. But I was pleasantly surprised when the Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, reversed this trend and has become a trendsetter. I agree. British Columbia had a system of people-initiated referendum, and now Kenney has Alberta the power on most important issues. They can force the votes on important issues by adopting a citizen-initiated referendum law. In his election platform, Kennedy had promised to give the power to boot irresponsible, misbehaving politicians by using the recall legislation. And both these policies to recall and policy to initiate referendum, are becoming law in the upcoming legislative session of Alberta. Albertans have waited a long time for the politicians to reaffirm the role of citizens as the real bosses. And by passing this recall and citizen referendum law, big steps are being taken by Premier Jason Kenney. And as a matter of fact, he is making the government and the elected politicians, elected leaders, accountable for their actions, for their deeds and misdeeds. And imagine if this power to recall was there, how many ministers would have been recalled by now? The ministers who violated ethics, whether at the provincial level or at the federal level, they would have been recalled. And what Jason Kenney is doing is, in fact, a lesson for the premiers of provinces like Ontario and Quebec to follow. As I said, British Columbia already has this system, and they were able to fund HST after the government bungled the policy, if you remember that. Although not a citizen-led initiative, the people were able to defeat British Columbia's TransLink tax and Calgary's Olympic bid. So you see the power of the people really manifested through these two steps. This action of Kenney is also a landmark decision for those countries which profess to be democratic, like India, but where corruption as far as the elected leaders are concerned is much too high to be even talked about. More than 70% of the elected representatives in India have criminal backgrounds. They have not been convicted because of the power regime and because of the defective judicial system. But they have been guilty, and the cases are being processed against them. Now, if the people in that province, in that country, had the power to recall, you can be sure many people would have been recalled. And if they had a right to have citizenship-led initiative, you can be sure that many laws would have changed by now. For example, even the punishment. I'm amazed that more than a decade passes before an action can be taken, and how the criminals misuse the judicial system. The latest rape case, Nirbhay rape case, how the convicted people condemned to be hanged have not been hanged because of the political manipulated judicial system. Now, coming to Alberta rule, one thing is very simple, that this system of recall and referendum is based on a very important principle. If the policy work for my people, for the people should be able to give politicians the boot, the pink slip for poor performance. If you remember, that lady Mariam, who was the Minister for Minorities, was proved to be guilty of perjury. She had made a wrong statement that she's a refugee from Afghanistan while she was an Iraqi. If the people had the right to recall, you can be sure she would have been recalled in the heat of the moment. Because the people were really angry. But later on, the memory of the people is short. And other incidents whitewash the ills of today. So, quite possible that she would have been recalled. Quite possible that when Prime Minister Trudeau was held to be guilty by the Ethics Commissioner, people were really hell-bent. But then they said, well, election is 4 years hence, we can't do anything. Had the right to recall at that time, they would have done it. If they had a right to referendum, you can be sure that by this time, the action against the immigration laws and the refugees would have been initiated because the citizen majority of them don't like it. Now, imagine, on the constitutional issue, Ottawa, the federal government is legally obligated to negotiate with the province if a provincial referendum results in a clear majority. Don't you think that this concept of equalization, robbing Peter to pay Paul, rewarding incompetence of the premiers who make their provinces economically weak, that whole concept of equalization, which was supposed to help the needy, but the hardworking needy, has become a sort of a charity to the incompetent and underperforming provinces. Now, if there was a provincial referendum, Ottawa would be compelled to look into it, and the majority decision equalization referendum would have left no doubt that this outmoded system would have been thrown in the garbage bin by this time. There is a concern sometimes people feel that there will be political chaos if the politicians allow citizens a sliver of a say in addition to the elections. But the elections take once in 4 years, once in 5 years, once in 7 years, depending on the place. So, the different laws that Kennedy can choose from to Alberta's model would not lead to chaos, but gives a fair shot at real democracy. And I marvel that this government is able to take a decision which it can face a problem. There would be some MLAs, there would be some lapses on the part of some politicians, and the citizens can initiate the process of recall or referendum. And I think that's something great, as it will be real democracy. Now, initially, Kenny had shown an interest in following the system of British Columbia. But then, is that a valid system? There are quite a number of problems in that system. So, quite possible that system may not be followed, and rightly so, because you don't follow a system which is wrong. And if that is not to be followed, then what should be done? The British Columbia model requires a citizens to collect 10% of the registered voters in 90 days to trigger a referendum. It doesn't sound so bad, but in the last referendum in British Columbia, it required collecting more than 320,000 signatures. That's almost 3,500 signatures per day. Not a difficult job, but not an easy job as well. Now compare it with California. The whole of California has a population of Canada, and it requires only 600,000 odd signatures to trigger a referendum. As a matter of fact, it should not be percentage. It should be a percentage which is possible. You know, again, the old Aristotelian concept of probability and possibility. It is possible to to have 10% vote signatures in 90 days. Yes. But would they be real signatures? Or would they be signatures which are not acceptable? As a matter of fact, depending on the area, depending on the demographic structure, it should be approximately like a system which Idaho has. Only 6% of the voters can trigger a referendum. So, suppose Kenny had to adopt the Idaho model. What will he do? He'll need only 113,000 signatures to trigger an Alberta referendum. That is about 200 signatures a day. So British Columbia requires 3,000 plus signatures a day, and the Idaho model requires 200 signatures a day. So, secondly, the location. Idaho model requires in 50% of the electoral districts. In Alberta, you can extend that in every district. I accept it that some districts have more population, but then an initiative must be province-wise or country-wise. That way, I was studying the other system, and the Switzerland system seems to be ideal. They say every canton should have 3% of the registered voters who can ask for referendum, and 3.5 to 5%, depending on the cantons, can ask for recall. Is asking for, if the people who have initiated, say, 3%, start a referendum, but that doesn't mean then the referendum takes place. And the voice of the people will be known in that election. In fact, this is the initiation process. And then the real test comes when the referendum and the recall voting takes place. You can always also put a penalty clause, especially in recall, that in case, for example, 5% people ask for a recall of an elected representative, and at the end of the election we find only, say, 20% people asking for the recall and 80% say no recall. then the people who initiated that should be asked to pay for the expenses. That will stop ridiculous recall reasons, and only the recall will be resorted to in real cases where people have really been hurt and where the person is really guilty. But these are the subtle nuances that can be worked out. The main thing is that Jason Kenney has taken a step, which is a great step as far as the implementation of the democratic principle is concerned, and gives hope to the people that some politicians are not only self-serving, they really mean good of the people. Jason, you have once again been able to win the Golden Fleece like the legendary Jason. Good luck to Alberta. And piece of advice to the other provinces and to the other countries, follow Jason's example. And if you follow it, Mr. Premier and Mr. Prime Minister of the other city countries and the provinces, you would have the same praise and the same regard of the people which Jason Kenney has today. Thank you.